So what we want to do is start like for show of hands, just to make sure. So how many of you are cities or counties or local government affiliated? And then how about on the developer side? Like either, how about plug-in charging? And then how about hydrogen? Okay, great. And so what we like to think, so, you know, I have two sons, they're named Shepherd and Summit, and they both amaze me in different ways every day. And then professionally, I feel like I have two sons or daughters also that are awesome drivetrains. One of them's battery and the other one's fuel cell, right? And like they also both get impressed. The bounds of what each of these technologies can do continues to expand. You know, batteries are doing way more than I thought was possible 5 years ago. And then the same thing is true for fuel cells, which is really exciting. So want to do, how many of you have been exposed to hydrogen in transportation? I know we're talking a lot about batteries. So a good number, but there's a few. So if you'll indulge me, I'll just do a little bit of a 101 on hydrogen to start us off. And then my colleague Keith, and Keith, you can make your way down whenever you want from the Fuel Cell Partnership, will join us. But this kind of introduction to fuel cells, like how they work, just really basic. It's one of the coolest devices you have exposure to. So hydrogen essentially comes in on one side of the fuel cell, meets with oxygen on the other side. The proton exchange membrane lets the proton through, but not the electron. So it creates an electrical circuit that goes through and generates electricity. And then out the tailpipe comes water. So it's pretty awesome, especially for the kids. You go through and you can catch the water on the with the cup and drink it, and it freaks them out. And but it's an electric vehicle in the sense that everything beyond the fuel cell is the same. It's electric drive. All those components are the same. It's either a battery as the power source or a hydrogen and fuel cell as the power source. And so just a quick look at the vehicle. So you have in the front, there's the oxygen intake. It meets up with on the back. You have the hydrogen that generates together with the fuel cell stack, bringing electricity to the motor. It also, they have batteries. A lot of it, if you think of kind of like a hybrid drivetrain, is a lot how, there's a battery, usually lithium ion, in that car that's doing all the regenerative braking, very much like a Toyota Prius would be, but instead of gasoline, you're using hydrogen. A station, Patrick mentioned this a little bit, is, very similar to filling up at a gasoline station. It takes 3 to 5 minutes. So, when we're talking with a DC fast charger, for example, you're looking at 3 to 20 minutes or 20 miles per minute. The hydrogen station is more on the order of 100 miles per minute. And so that's really kind of when the advantage, about 5 minutes to fill up, which offers a lot of flexibility. And that's on the light duty side. On the heavy duty side, you're looking at maybe a 15-minute fill up. If you're a permit official reviewing that, you'd have, there's a hydrogen supply is at number 1 here at the bottom left. And then that works its way through and you get the compression on site. And then storage, which is storing that compressed hydrogen. And there's temperature control, and then the dispensing unit. For the customer, it looks very much like gasoline. And it's been interesting, actually. California is the only place in the world where you give people a car and a credit card and just tell them to go fuel. Other places like Japan and Germany have attended fueling, and people don't have to mess with it. So here we're kind of the Wild West. We let people go. And so that freaks people out a little bit at first, and you go and you do it, and it's really not that intimidating. But also from a local official, just making sure that that's safe. So there's a bunch of codes and standards in place to make sure that it is completely safe for filling. And so fuel cells are really, their application is far and wide. On the left-hand side here, we have light duty vehicles, which are on the market, and Keith will talk more. But then it expands up, from buses, heavy duty trucks. There's a great robust market in the forklift industry. To trains, we're starting to see coming on the market. And there's also, energy storage applications down on the bottom. And then hydrogen, where it comes from, is really two sources, right? So hydrogen doesn't exist on its own in the world. So you need energy to separate it and create, pure hydrogen. Two hydrogens together, that's why it's H2, and there's lots of H2 hashtags we can kind of talk about. But there's really two ways. There's hydrogen from water, which is electrolysis. You just put electricity into the water, it separates the hydrogen and oxygen off. If that oxygen is usable, you might be able to sell that, but it's really the hydrogen that we're after. On the right side, we have the hydrogen from natural gas. This could be either fossil natural gas, or it can be renewable natural gas, biogas, however you want to call it. There's 4 hydrogens per, on a methane molecule. And so using heat and catalytic reaction, you can split the molecule away from that hydrogen. And so there is that carbon that comes off the side. And so you can look at either carbon capture in a fossil environment, or even in a biogas environment. From a climate perspective, looks really good. But it's odorless, it's fast, it likes to get out of the way. And so hydrogen, you have to figure out a way to contain it as energy. And that's kind of what the hydrogen station's all about. And so if you look at, kind of where we've been and where we're going, the hydrogen's been used, for decades in industry. NASA was a big user of it. And it traditionally came from fossil fuel sources, right? And so you'd put that, you take natural gas, reform it, and then put it into traditional markets. And those traditional markets are refining of gasoline, it's fertilizers, it's making toothpaste. I mean, it's a semiconductor industry. So that's kind of the old school. What we're working towards is like moving away from fossil hydrogen altogether and going on the top left, you got the biomethane resources. So like that's dairy digesters, that's wastewater treatment facilities, and then putting that into a bunch of other stuff. And so on the other side, we have the electric grid, right? And where hydrogen gets really exciting is it's great at long duration energy storage. And so you can, like where a battery is really optimal on a grid scale of, in the days of energy storage, hydrogen is more of a seasonal storage type of thing. So that there's some great flexibility there. Today, we're really focusing in on the transportation sector, which we've circled up there, but you have the, on and off grid power storage. We got the traditional markets, and then we also have kind of new storage opportunities. So focusing back in on transportation, and then specifically, this is looking at the light duty sector. We had an executive order that Governor Brown had signed that, dictating we're aiming towards 200 hydrogen stations by 2025. We don't have a similar target on the heavy duty side, but we're also making a big push there too, because there's a lot of opportunities in heavy duty. The California Fuel Cell Partnership, which we're members of, has a target of 1,000 stations to enable 1 million fuel cell vehicles by 2030. And so why is that significant? So if you look here, so right here on the left-hand side of this map, we have our currently funded stations, kind of the dots on the map, and you can zoom in and see, and Keith will show you a close-up. If you did 200 stations, that map, in the middle kind of shows where those 200 stations might land. The heat map shows the density of that network, right? So the 200, if you take a look, kind of the green, we're not at any place doesn't really have high density, but there's good fueling there. And these cars have ranges that should remind you of, 300 miles or so. So having one station we have one at Harris Ranch, you can easily get back and forth between the north and the south. But if you layer on, 1,000 stations, you go, now you're starting to see some more density follow in those core markets. And why is that 1,000 significant? Well, now look at the middle here. So this is essentially the density of our existing gasoline station network. And so with about 1,000 hydrogen stations, we can replace the functionality of our current gasoline network. And so why it's exciting is because it is a one-for-one replacement in terms of habit, right? If you live in a multi-unit dwelling or don't have access to charging in a convenient way, the fuel cell is an option to bring more people into the marketplace. So back in 2015, we released a hydrogen permitting guidebook. This was the first of its kind to kind of help make sure that we point out all the codes and standards, the process and going. It was really just developed with an eye towards completing, getting stations into the ground. And the question at the time was really, can we even make this market work? And the answer is yes. And this graph is hard to see. Well, I guess you can see it on your screens, but essentially this is the throughput through time. So starting in 2015, when this guidebook was released, it's not cause and effect from the guidebook necessarily, but then going through time, you can see the consumption working its way up as more and more cars. We have about 8,000 plus cars on the road today. The main constraining factor is the station network. You'll see some dips in there. So there has been some challenges in supply, and that's kind of something, but by and large, the market can and does work. But we do have work to do, right? So the hydrogen station development time, when we first started, back in 2009, 1482 was the number of average days. So 1,482 was the average days of station development. More recently, we're getting close to 800. You'll see, if you look at the green bar, that the green part of the graph was actually our state process. So it's kind of like Brian's Kelly VIP program, just streamlining that process between awarding funding and getting funding. But the purple bar is kind of what we're focused on today. And so we have the average permitting time is about 333 days. So, you know, you're looking at about a year. Now, this is different. We don't have the streamlining law that's on the books for EV charging stations, which says only building looks at it. That does not apply to hydrogen fueling stations. They're still planning and everything. So if hydrogen stations are going through a normal process, we're not asking you to change that. What we are asking for is just to pay attention and ask questions. Like if there's one key lesson learned from our work in trying to get these things in the ground is just communication is key, right? It's meeting early and often and making sure that the local city and the station developer are in clear communication as they build the project going forward. So today's stations, if you get a chance to drive by one, probably the most distinct to look is in the top right. That's a first element fuel or true zero. They have that canopy, which is kind of sticks out. There's also stations that are popping up at Shell locations, but look just like a normal gasoline station. So you wouldn't really notice unless you're looking for it. And my kids and wife get a little, I point out it every time we see it. Same thing with chargers. And the chargers, you know, it's becoming more commonplace, which is exciting, but also they get annoyed with me. So, so there's to kind of look at that. But really today, the key to success is really about market acceleration. So it's not, well, the experiment is over. Now is the time really to move. So you'll start to see some more stuff coming in at the local level, both on the light duty and heavy duty side, as far as stations go. And there's not a whole lot of difference between those. It's just location and size. So we haven't released this yet, but we have the 2020 hydrogen station permitting guidebook update coming out. And we'll focus a lot of time, you know, kind of on that station development process. The updates we have there, you know, we're seeing increasing trends towards industry commitments towards renewable hydrogen. It's we have a lot more focus on medium and heavy duty. In 2015, medium and heavy duty was really kind of a dream, except for the bus market. Now it's becoming more of a reality. Same thing on the battery side, which is really, really exciting. And so those are the focal points. And then really kind of at GoBiz, we're just here to help. So we've had a lot of experience working with jurisdictions and with station developers. And our job is really to connect resources and make sure that you're asking questions. We're never going to say you need to put this station here and make it happen. We want communities to be excited about these assets and to work with the station developers to have something that your community is proud of. I think the main thing that we want to try to avoid is those multiple rounds of comments and but you know, working together to get through the planning departments and planning commissions. And I have a number of stories that I won't share with you, but that were pretty interesting going through that process. And we love this picture just because, you know, the rainbows shine on zero emission vehicles. I think our saying in the office is every time a ZEV is born into the market, an angel gets its wings. So here's this. And so Keith, if you can come up, and I'll hand it over to Keith Keith has been doing outreach and education and all sorts of things for the California Fuel Cell Partnership for a long time. We've been partnered. He does a great job. He's learned a lot just trying to get this stuff out in the market.
Thank you, Tyson. So good morning. I know some of you said you had familiarity with fuel cell electric vehicles, and I'd just like to ask, how many of you have actually driven a fuel cell car? Okay. So like you said, my name's Keith Malone. I've been with the California Fuel Cell Partnership now for about 7.5 years. I'm actually based here in Los Angeles, actually very close outside of downtown LA, although getting here this morning was hellacious. But that said, the Fuel Cell Partnership is actually based up in West Sacramento. We have two colleagues down here, myself and another colleague down in Long Beach. And I often like to joke that we are kind of the private sector counterpart to GoBiz, that we have many similar functions, but slightly different dynamics. And let's see if I know how to do this. There we go. Sorry, I know how to drive a fuel cell car. I don't know how to do this stuff. Or am I doing that one?
Oh, it's not your fault, Keith.
Well, also,
there we go.
Oh, there we
Wait a second. There we go.
Right click. Okay. So I've been with the partnership for 7.5 years. I've been driving a fuel cell car full-time for 6.5 years. And like I tell people, a lot of times I go out and I do community events. So by the way, for those of you who are in cities and you have community events and you know that you have a hydrogen station or that you will have a hydrogen station, you want to start doing that community education, reach out to us. Happy to go out there, open the hood, put on my sun hat, and start talking in English and in Spanish about this technology. But the one thing I do is people walk by the car, I'm like, damn fun car to drive. And they'll stop and they'll go, what? I'm like, come here, come here. But I tell them, it's just like any other electric drive vehicle. If everybody's going 70, I'm going 70 as well. And like any good Angelino, if there's an idiot in front of me, I will yell at him or her first and hit the gas and go right around them, all the while yelling with my windows rolled up, eat my water vapor. So, sorry, I'm usually much more comfortable if I have a car next to me, much more comfortable talking that way. So as you can see in the fuel cell partnership, we're a public-private partnership. We've been around for about 20 years. We were created to move fuel cell technology and hydrogen-related technology further along the commercial pathway. And if you look at many of our members, I'd estimate about 50 to 60% of our members work both pathways. So if you look at the kind of the top, our executive level members, many of them work on both drivetrains, both battery electric and fuel cell electric. So embedded within our DNA is the recognition that you need both of these technologies to get to that zero emission future. So if you've been to our website, one of the pages that everyone comes to quite a bit is our Google map that shows where all the stations are at the moment. So that means stations that are open and available to light duty drivers, also the bus stations that are open and the truck stations that are open, or those that are in development. So if you actually went to our website, you would actually see right now the truck stations are in development. So we also have these available to you in PDF format. If you're doing a presentation at your city, we're certainly happy to come and talk to your council members, your colleagues, but also we can make these available to you as well. As Tyson said, right now in California, we have over 8,000 cars, even though Japan and Germany have twice as many stations, have more stations than we do, we have twice as many cars. So we are really, when we talk about, it's kind of humbling, and I'm sure many of you have found this as well, when you go outside of California, whether it's to other US states or other countries, they really view us as leaders. And just kind of when they look to us, especially on fuel cell electric vehicles. One time I had a group of folks from Europe and they were coming into California to talk about their work with fuel cell buses, and all my colleagues walked away. My European colleagues turned to me and they said, "We thought you were ahead." And I leaned in and I said, "I thought you were ahead." And I said, "Maybe the Japanese are." And they were like, "Nah." So what we've discovered over time is that you kind of look to different parts of the world to see who's ahead. So in Europe, they're further ahead with the buses. The bus costs have been coming down really quickly there. We're ahead in the light duty sector. And then there's just kind of this recognition that in China, it's growing. Just the volume, most of us know on the battery electric as well as fuel cell electric side that the volume in China will help drive down costs and more. So you've already seen a lot of these cars. Some of them, I'll tell you this, after this seminar, if you've never seen a fuel cell car before, you'll start seeing them. Happens all the time. I'll talk with people about the technology, and the next day they'll be like, "Oh my God, I was on the freeway and I saw a Toyota Mirai." So currently I've driven the fuel cell Mirai for about 1.5 years. I now drive the Hyundai Nexo. I have it with me over at one of the parking lots if you ever want to see it or take a test drive. And this is the newest car to come out later this year. This is the new Toyota Mirai. It'll debut probably around the time of the 2020 Olympics. This one gets 30% more mileage than its previous version. And I actually want to back up for a second because Toyota really marked the launch of this market. So today you're going to hear a little more education than you are going to hear about funding on the fuel cell electric vehicle side because we are a much younger market. We're only about at best 5 years old, and that really launched with the Mirai. Prior to that, we had a few retail stations, mostly demo stations. So I want to kind of keep that in perspective as I'm talking about this and really focusing more on the education and getting you comfortable with the technology and the resources and the people who are available to you. And as we talked about stations, I want you to see this is the prettiest hydrogen station in the world. It's based in La Cañada, Flint Ridge. So not only did they add new landscaping to the entire gas station, they also added that lovely sculpture behind the pump. So
Part of the plan.
process. And if you look at the development side for fuel cell electric vehicles, I'm sure it mirrors the charging side, where permitting and planning tends to be the most variable in terms of time. So, you know, just to give you an idea, actually fueling up is pretty similar to a regular car. I mean, I'm going to drive up. I've got my credit card. I'm just going to, and I'm not going to pay inside the gas station for the time being. The way the stations are funded, really what takes place is, at the moment, as I talk more about that, is that station developers are funded. They'll go in, they will lease space from existing gas stations. And so that pump and that kind of hydrogen station tends to be independent of the gas station itself. So you won't be going into the gas station, into the market, unless you're getting something to eat or something to drink or a key to the bathroom. You're going to pay at the pump. And so you're just going to, you know, you're going to put in your card like you would with a regular pump. You're going to take the nozzle, you're going to lock it in. It's a male-female connector like you see with natural gas vehicles or say with propane tanks. And you're just going to lock the nozzle like you would. I usually like to jiggle it a little bit just to make sure it's secure. And I get to fully fueling. And then in about 3 to 5 minutes, I'm ready to go. And that's it. Am I missing anything?
No.
Okay. Yeah, and I tell people, because a lot of times people want to see how it's fueled, and I tell them, I said, be prepared to be very bored. You're going to see it once, you're never going to want to see it again. And that's just because, and that's something we've really wanted. If you talk to most of the stakeholders, we like having them at gas station. It matches the business case for these gas station owners. It also gives them what environmentalists say, a just transition. It gives them an on-ramp to the renewable future. And it also gives them a new business opportunity. And especially for those stations that are early adopters, this is early adopter country. These are people with extra money. And so they're hoping to bring in money into their markets as well.
Real quick question, if I could. What does it sound like when you hook up? Like a gas vehicle, I know there's a big pump and it's almost frightening, but.
You're going to hear, probably in some cases, you're going to hear the compressor behind the walls. And then at the end of fueling, you're going to hear kind of like an off-gassing. So you'll hear a like that, and you're good to go. And then your pump will probably give you a nice beep. Like beep, beep, you're good to go.
Yeah, there's a pressure, it'll test the tank pressure. So you hear a little charge and then it'll
go silent for a minute. And for those of you who are new to that experience, you'll be like, wait, has it stopped? And it just, nowadays they'll give you a little note on the thing saying we're just having a quiet moment and it'll get going in just a second. So, you know, I've kind of tried to describe kind of the different kinds of stations that are out there. What you're probably going to see are very separate. You're going to see separate stations. Passenger vehicle stations at regular gas stations, obviously transit stations with transit agencies, and truck stations kind of mirroring what you see at regular heavy duty stations with truck stops. In some cases, you might see a few stations that kind of combine categories. So up in Emeryville, AC Transit on one side of the fence is fueling buses, on the other side is fueling light duty. It's very rare you're going to see that. Most transit agencies, they have a certain business case. They don't want to get into the light duty market. It's possible you might see some transit agencies down the road do that if they're trying to enable taxi services, or if they're, let's say, maybe in a rural area where it makes sense to kind of double up. Coming down the road, you may see with companies like Nikola Motor Company, they're building trucks. They are looking to serve both light duty and heavy duty. But for the most part, what you're going to see down the road are kind of what I call single-use stations or single vehicle category stations. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else in here. Any questions so far? I'm kind of like a wind-up doll, so I tend to work better that way. So when it comes to funding right now, you don't have a lot of like our charging siblings, you don't have as many kind of pots of money from which to draw. The main one you have is with the Energy Commission's Clean Transportation Program. It comes out of a bill from 2013, Assembly Bill 8, and it was meant to fund upwards of approximately 100 stations. So when Tyson was talking about those milestones of 200 stations and 1,000 stations, there's also an earlier one that we're just getting ready to achieve, and that's the 100 station milestone. So right now, if you look at our map, we have about 40 some odd stations in operation, about another 20 that are in development, and there is a grant funding opportunity out on the streets right now from the Energy Commission that should fund approximately 40 to 50 stations, pushing us just a little bit beyond that 100 station milestone. You also have kind of combined with that, you have some local entities like the Bay Area AQMD and the San Luis Obispo Air Pollution Control District that are offering additional funds to kind of help bolster fueling infrastructure in their areas. So for example, San Luis Obispo at the partnership, one of the most requested station locations we get is San Luis Obispo. If you kind of look at the state map, it makes sense. It's there on that coastal spine, just like Harris Ranch is for the 5. They came together, actually, a coalition of state agencies and local stakeholders, and they've put up $250,000. It's not a lot of money, but you're beginning to see localities doing that. In fact, right now you've got, I won't say who it is, but you do have one planning agency that is looking to float probably a sales tax in the near future, and they are considering including both charging and hydrogen fueling infrastructure in that funding package. So I think as we move forward, you're going to begin to see other kinds of pots of money emerge. And on the medium duty and heavy duty side, you have a number of funding programs out of CARB and increasingly out of the Energy Commission as well. You'll see those. Any questions? I've tried to keep it relatively high level. And like Tyson has said, we are there to help you. We can be your Sherpas guiding you through. And if we don't have the answers, we usually know who does. And just to kind of give you a sense, when I talked about Assembly Bill 8 from 2013, one of the requirements is that the Energy Commission reports annually to the legislature and gives an overview of where the network is. And so those are available online. You can find them not only on the Energy Commission site, you can find them on the Fuel Cell Partnership site in our resources database.
Just real quick on the last slide, want to point out also missing from the slide is MSRC, Mobile Source Resource Committee in Southern California. They have $3 million available for hydrogen infrastructure. Deadlines Friday, April 10th, 2020 for local governments.
I had actually, before I got up to speak, I had remembered them and I apologize. Yeah, MSRC has been very supportive and they've got a pawn out right now. But as part of this AB 13, the kind of the stakeholders in general report to the legislature. It's a good document to get some data. One of the things that comes out of this is that the Energy Commission and CARB regularly query automakers as to what they think over the next 3 years their output is going to be of fuel cell electric vehicles. So this kind of gives you a sense of where we are going out to 2025. I would also remind you, if you look at our membership, you see a number of automakers that are very strongly devoted, say at the moment, to battery electric vehicles. You see GM, you see Nissan, they have remained executive level members for quite a long time. You're going to see autos come, additional vehicles come to market. BMW has already announced. Audi signed a joint technology sharing agreement with Hyundai 2 years ago, specifically on fuel cell vehicles. It will be coming to market. So just because you haven't seen them yet doesn't mean they're not going to. Just think of it as kind of, it's always a strategy, and every automaker comes to market differently. I mean, Toyota obviously has been remarkably aggressive about this. They learned a lot from the Prius. They learned to be upfront and early. Honda has come to market. As you know, with the Clarity, they came out with first the fuel cell vehicle, then they came out with the battery electric and the hybrid version, although I think they're pulling back on the battery electric version. It was recently announced. And then you have Hyundai, which is equally as aggressive. Both, if you look at South Korea and Japan as well, they both talk very strongly about the hydrogen society. So a lot of times, sometimes we get, I sometimes get engaged in what I call electric vehicle deathmatch or EV deathmatch. And it's fueled by this belief there's only one true pathway to a zero emission future. And as you already know from the Fuel Cell Partnership, we believe in both. But sometimes there are a lot of negatives that are thrown at us. Like, hydrogen is not renewable, and then I have to remind them it's on a renewable pathway, just like the grid. Sometimes they talk about station costs, and as they come into your cities or your jurisdictions, we know that the costs of the infrastructure is coming down, and we've had a number of good indicators. Just the two that I've mentioned, Shell came out with a thought paper a couple of years ago. Again, it's on our website. And they estimated they could reduce the cost of their infrastructure by 30% just by taking almost a cookie cutter approach and standardization. NREL came out with a similar study last year. And then you've had recent analyses out of Bloomberg New Energy Fund. And recently McKinsey & Company on behalf of the Hydrogen Council saying that we're going to see low cost renewable hydrogen by 2030. We're going to see the cost of hydrogen solutions reduced by 50% sooner than anybody had expected. The Hydrogen Council report looking at about 13,000 data points and across multiple countries. Just poke me in the neck if I'm talking too much. And some of you are going to be wondering, because we get calls and emails every now and then from cities going, how do we get a hydrogen station? And there are a couple of ways to kind of get a sense if your city is kind of in everyone's sights. So one of them is the automakers published a letter where they want to see about 140 station locations. It's located on our website. I'm happy to direct you to it. And embedded in the slide is a link. Also, as part of the siting or funding of hydrogen stations through the Energy Commission, they use a tool called the California Hydrogen Infrastructure Tool. And I've been told I have one more minute. I have slides here about buses and trucks. And last, I really want to focus on there are a lot of online resources that are available to you in addition to the human beings that are here in this room. And so if ever you have questions, you're welcome to reach out to us by phone or by email, and we'll be happy to work to help you answer those questions. So with that, I want to thank you very much.
And we have time for maybe a couple of questions, and then before we head into lunch.
Hi, a few questions on the webinar. Does the development of these stations present a small business opportunity? Can an entrepreneur start a green business by doing this?
So my perspective is, at this time, if I were a small business person, if I were a gas station owner, I would definitely pursue it, but I would pursue it with those that are already developing hydrogen stations. I would say this is such an early market and the expenses are still relatively high. There are ways into kind of this industry, but I would say kind of going it alone. We've had a couple of examples where small businesses have tried, and they need to have a certain amount of fat with them, kind of the funding backup, and we're not at that point. I think you need to give this market a little more time for them, especially if they're a small business. If they're a gas station owner, I think there are some interesting opportunities, especially if they're in the right location in the right city or community. I know that sounds negative, but I don't want to give them, I don't want to be, what would you call it? I don't want to be negative about it. I don't want to lead them into something.
That being said, though, I would say the Fuel Cell Partnership is a great place to start. And also at GoBiz, we're happy to talk to anybody who's interested.
Yeah, I just don't want to be a Pollyanna about it. I think in time, there's going to be some really interesting opportunities. And if that person wants to talk to me directly, give me a ring.
Okay. Another question online. Is there an estimated time frame when the 2020 hydrogen station permitting guidebook will be launched?
So it's at the state publisher's office right now. So hopefully that means April.
And last question, to the developers in the room, what does scale look like in this industry? Can one station, EV or hydrogen, be profitable?
Whether, Joe, I don't know if you want to answer, or well, just in a quick thing. So one station on its own is going to be challenging to make a profit at a price that can be sold, this in the hydrogen context, at a low cost to a customer, right? So we really need to build a network, right? That everything reinforces itself. Light duty reinforces heavy duty. So light duty drives up the volume on fuel cell production. Heavy duty drives up the volume on hydrogen consumption. And those are kind of, it's a virtuous cycle. Same thing, you know, on the battery side, you know, the more stations we have out there, the more cars you can have, the more volume. So like if you look at a fast charging network, the most exciting opportunity is probably in like car sharing or somewhere there's high throughput at those fast charging locations.
I think a lot of it is it's location, 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 and throughput, and a few other factors.
Okay. I know we have to.
Comment question. Given the McKinsey study and how many stars that need to line up in order to drive down, some of the infrastructure costs, isn't it more prudent to focus on heavy duty goods movement around the hydrogen? Because the cost, getting to cost parity there is a little earlier than with the light duty segment. I see a lot of focus here on light duty passenger, but the numbers are a lot further away, given that we're probably close to what, $12 a kilogram for hydrogen today at the retail pump, and it needs to be closer to $2.50 to $4 a kilogram from the McKinsey study. That's the number if I recall. That's a pretty far stretch. How do we close that gap?
I think, yeah, like it all comes down to volume, right? I think it's the heavy duty side. So on the heavy duty side, especially for the buses, like the potential for volume is very high, and also it's a lower pressure, which means less compressors, so that there's a lot of benefit there as well. I think that the main thing that we're seeing is it's not either or. I think we want to focus on all of it, right? In a way, so like I said, so Toyota and Hyundai, for example, their strategy, they're actually using 2 of their fuel cell stacks to put into Class 8 trucks. That's their strategy there. And so as a state, we're doing everything we can to get the light duty network going, and also in tandem the heavy duty, and then take advantage of those supply points working together.
And within the partnership, although when we were founded, it was really about light duty. In the last 3 years, we've expanded to include heavy duty in a way that we never have. And I think if you look at, there's agreement within our membership, there's probably a likelihood of where fuel cell electric drive and battery electric drive will kind of dominate or have their strengths, but that doesn't mean it's going to be exclusive. And there are still circumstances where I think, at least on the light duty side, where you need fuel cell technology. And also I think it's a timeline. It's just where we are at the moment. We're able to talk more about light duty because there's just more going on.
Great. Well, thank you. And I think for those of you in the city and county, you'll probably see, light duty stations and heavy duty stations are largely the same. They're just the footprint's different and the use case. But I think now, do you want to kick it? So I've been told to remind, so at the end of this, don't forget that we have a ride and drive, and I think there's Model 3 there, which is really exciting, and also the fuel cell Clarity. So both, I think, I'm excited about both of them. So you make your own judgments.